Keanu Reeves visited a local charity orphanage. Everything seemed perfectly fine at first. Smiles, handshakes, warm gestures, it was a wholesome event on the surface. But just as he was about to leave, something caught his attention. Something that made him stop in his tracks. Something he couldn't ignore. It had been a long day for Keanu, meetings, script readings, a charity dinner that stretched way past schedule. By the time he finally stepped through his front door, exhaustion weighed heavy on him. He dropped his keys onto the console table, the sound echoing through the quiet of his home. His eyes landed on a growing stack of unopened mail, an unfortunate casualty of his relentless schedule. Sighing, he grabbed the pile and wandered into the kitchen, pouring himself a generous glass of whiskey. The amber liquid caught the dim light as he swirled it in his glass, taking a slow sip, letting the smoky warmth settle. Then, one by one, he sifted through the mail. Bills, promotional flyers, a few fan letters with colorful stickers, routine, impersonal, predictable. But then, something different. A plain, unmarked envelope near the bottom. No flashy logos, no heavy cardstock. Just simple paper, understated yet somehow intriguing. Keanu set his drink down, carefully tearing it open. Inside was an invitation. Haven Hills Children's Home. A charity event. And he had been invited as a special guest. He exhaled sharply, realizing with a pang of guilt that the invite had been sitting there for days, unnoticed and forgotten. As he leaned back in his chair, something else caught his eye, a letter, written in neat but slightly hesitant handwriting. He opened it and began to read. Dear Mr. Reeves, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Merida Lafayette, and I grew up in the foster care system. I wanted to tell you how much your work has meant to me. Growing up without a family was incredibly difficult. There were times I felt invisible, like I didn't matter to anyone. But your movies, the characters you played, they gave me hope. They showed me that even in the darkest moments, there's kindness and strength. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about how foster kids like me seem to be forgotten. The news is always filled with political scandals and celebrity gossip, but kids in the system? It's like we don't even exist. I know you're busy, but I just wanted you to know that what you do makes a difference. Even when the rest of the world doesn't seem to care. Thank you. Merida *. Keanu sat motionless, the letter still in his hands. Her words echoed in his mind, pulling his thoughts back to that invitation from Haven Hills. He reached for his phone and started looking up the orphanage. A small facility in Orange County, about an hour and a half away. Their website was modest, just a few smiling children, a simple mission statement. It was clear they were operating on limited resources. Despite his packed schedule, something about this weighed on him. Would his presence at such a small event really make an impact? Did it even matter? As these thoughts swirled in his head, he placed his phone down and made his way to bed. But before sleep claimed him, he made a mental note: call Patrick in the morning. Find a way to make it work. The next day, as the California sun streamed through his bedroom window, Keanu's phone buzzed incessantly on his nightstand. A flood of messages, reminders, obligations pulling him back into the chaos of Hollywood. He rubbed his eyes, exhaling deeply. But today, one thing was different. Today, Keanu Reeves had a promise to keep. Patrick had already sent over Keanu's schedule for the day, and it was packed from morning till night: a breakfast meeting with a potential director, a costume fitting for his upcoming film, a lunch interview with a major magazine, and an evening script reading for a new project. Every minute accounted for, every obligation carefully slotted into place. As Keanu scrolled through his messages, his eyes landed on the charity event invitation he had found last night. A pang of guilt crept in. It would be so easy to let it slip away, buried under the whirlwind of Hollywood obligations. But something about that letter, about Merida's words, still lingered in his mind. Determined to at least consider the possibility, he picked up his phone and dialed Patrick. Morning, Keanu. Patrick's voice was crisp, professional as always. I trust you've seen today's schedule? Morning, Patrick. Yeah, I've seen it. Listen, I wanted to ask you something. Keanu's voice was still rough with sleep. Did we get an invitation from Haven Hills Children's Home for a charity event today? A brief pause. Then, a sigh. Yes, we did. I meant to mention it earlier, but with everything else going on. Patrick hesitated before adding, to be honest, Keanu, I didn't think it was worth bringing up. It's a very small event, practically no media coverage, just a few local outlets. Not really worth your time, especially with how packed your schedule is. Keanu frowned, a mix of confusion and concern washing over him. Wait, you knew about this? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Patrick's tone shifted, turning defensive. I did try to bring it up a few times over the past month, Keanu. But you were always so busy, and you never confirmed whether you wanted to attend. I assumed you weren't interested. Keanu ran a hand through his hair, frustration creeping in. Maybe Patrick was right. Maybe it had come up, lost somewhere between endless meetings and film commitments. He exhaled slowly, trying to keep his voice level. I see. Well, I'm considering it now. Do you think we could move things around to make it work? Keanu, I really don't think it's a good idea, Patrick countered. This orphanage is tiny, way out in Orange County. The event will barely make a blip on local news, let alone anything significant. Your time will be much better spent focusing on your current commitments. Keanu felt torn. From a career standpoint, Patrick had a point. But deep down, something about this event felt more important than it seemed on the surface. I get your point, Patrick, Keanu said slowly. But the fact that they reached out multiple times, through management and mail, shows how much this means to them. Doesn't that count for something? Patrick's voice softened, sensing Keanu's genuine concern. Look, I get it. Your heart's in the right place. But you can't say yes to every small charity event. If you really want to help, we can arrange a private visit another time. Today, we need to stick to the schedule. Keanu leaned against the counter, his resolve wavering. Patrick's logic made sense. He had commitments, responsibilities. He had already made promises to people counting on him. All right, Keanu sighed, rubbing his forehead. You're right. We'll stick to the schedule. After ending the call, he lingered for a moment, staring at his phone as if the conversation's weight hadn't entirely left him. He took a deep breath, set it down, and went to get ready. As he pulled on his jacket, the house remained quiet, save for the soft rustling of fabric and his measured footsteps. He grabbed his keys, hesitating briefly before stepping outside. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint hum of a city just beginning to wake. Keanu walked toward his usual breakfast cafe, the familiar path offering a sense of routine, a grounding force against the restless thoughts still circling in his mind. Even as he told himself he was making the right decision, the guilt lingered, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. At least he had acknowledged the event, planned to attend another time. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. The warm scent of coffee and fresh pastries greeted him as he stepped inside the cafe. It was a small, cozy space, buzzing with quiet energy, clinking dishes, murmured conversations, the occasional rustle of a newspaper. He slid into his usual seat by the window, placing his order with familiar ease. But even as he waited for his coffee, his mind remained elsewhere, still tangled in thoughts about Haven Hills. The low hum of nearby voices broke his reverie. Just a few feet away, two women were deep in conversation, their voices a mix of frustration and determination. It's gotten so much harder in the past decade, one of them said, her tone heavy with exhaustion. All the news cares about is political drama and celebrity gossip. Kids in orphanages? It's like they don't even exist. Keanu's fingers tightened slightly around his coffee cup. Maybe Patrick was right. Or maybe this was exactly why he needed to go. At a nearby table, two women sat deep in conversation, their voices laced with frustration and determination. It's getting worse every year, one of them said, gesturing emphatically. All the news cares about is political drama and celebrity gossip. Kids in orphanages, the elderly in care homes, they're just forgotten. Her companion nodded, her expression serious. Exactly. It's like they've become invisible. No one pays attention unless there's a scandal or some tragedy to exploit. If only we had someone who could really bring attention to the cause, someone people would actually listen to. Keanu shifted in his seat. Their words hit harder than he expected. He took another sip of his coffee, but slower this time, his thoughts growing heavier. The guilt from earlier twisted into something sharper, a sense of urgency. For the first time that morning, his focus locked in, not just on the event itself, but on why it mattered. He glanced at the women, their conversation continuing, and wondered if this was the universe nudging him toward something bigger. And then, speaking of which, the first woman continued, "Did you hear about that event at Haven Hills today?" "Oh yeah," her friend replied dismissively. "Decided not to go, though. It's so far out, and the impact would be minimal. Barely any media coverage. They should have tried harder." The word struck Keanu like a gut punch. Here were two people who cared about charity work, and even they were dismissing Haven Hills as too small to matter. His mind immediately jumped to the kids there, probably waiting in anticipation, excited for a special guest to arrive. But what if no one showed up? What if, yet again, they were left feeling like they didn't matter? Keanu set his cup down, exhaling slowly. No. He wasn't going to let this be another forgotten event. Pulling out his phone, he dialed Patrick. "Patrick, I need you to clear my morning schedule," he said, his tone firm. A beat of silence. Then, "Keanu, we already talked about this." "I know we did," he cut in. "But this feels important. Sometimes showing up for the people who are overlooked by society is more important than any high-profile engagement." Patrick started to protest, but Keanu had already made up his mind. "I'm going to Haven Hills." And with that, he ended the call. Back at home, he grabbed his car keys, a determined glint in his eye. The drive to Haven Hills was a slow unraveling of Hollywood's sleek, modern edges. The towering buildings softened into suburban streets, neat lawns, and freshly painted houses lining the roads. But the further he drove, the more the pristine scenery began to fade. Sidewalks disappeared. Streets narrowed. The houses grew smaller, older, their yards less manicured, their paint a little more faded. He turned onto a quiet, unmarked road, the GPS leading him deeper into a part of Orange County few people thought about. Then, finally, he saw it. A weathered wooden sign stood at the edge of the road, Haven Hills Children's Home. The letters, once painted in bright, cheerful blue, had faded under years of sun and rain. A hand-drawn sun peeked from behind a cloud in the corner, as if someone had once tried to make it welcoming. Now, the sign leaned slightly, as though the earth beneath it had grown tired of holding it upright. Keanu pulled into the small, unpaved parking lot. It was empty, save for a couple of cars. He killed the engine and sat for a moment in the silence that followed. The building ahead of him was simple, 2 stories, no flashy renovations, no attempt to hide the years it had weathered. The front steps sagged slightly, worn smooth from decades of small feet running up and down. To the side, an overgrown garden stretched along the property. Wildflowers tangled with weeds. A lone wooden bench sat crookedly among them, its paint peeling in long strips. It must have been beautiful once. A place someone cared for. Much like the home itself. Keanu stepped out of the car, closing the door gently. The air here felt still, almost expectant. This wasn't a grand charity gala, not some glittering Hollywood fundraiser. It was just a home. Worn but enduring. And as he walked toward the entrance, one thought settled firmly in his mind. This place, these kids, they deserved more than to be forgotten. The reception desk was empty. A thin layer of dust coated its surface, suggesting it hadn't been used in some time. "Hello?" Keanu called out, his voice echoing through the silent hallway. No response. A strange unease settled in his chest. He had expected some kind of welcome, staff preparing for the event, the sound of children playing, maybe even a few curious faces peeking around the corner. Instead, the place felt abandoned. Cautiously, he made his way down the main corridor. Faded posters about child safety and education programs lined the walls, their edges curling with age. The linoleum floor squeaked beneath his footsteps, the sound unsettling in the overwhelming quiet. Then, movement. Through the small circular window of a playroom door, Keanu spotted two young girls sitting in the corner. Around 10 years old, both black, both unnervingly still. The room was dimly lit, the only light filtering in through a single window on the far wall. What struck Keanu most wasn't their silence, but the look in their eyes. Not boredom. Not curiosity. Fear. A deep, quiet fear that made his stomach twist. Concerned, Keanu reached for the door handle, his fingers grazing the cool metal. "Excuse me, Mr. Reeves. I'm so sorry, I didn't hear you come in." Keanu turned to see a man hurrying toward him from the far end of the hallway, slightly out of breath. He was dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit, just a little too loose in the shoulders, his tie askew as if he had thrown it on in a rush. Victor Langford, the man introduced himself, forcing a smile. "I'm the owner and director here at Haven Hills. We weren't expecting you. Your management never responded to our invitation." Keanu shook his hand, noting the slightly too firm grip. "I apologize for the surprise visit," Keanu said evenly. "I only recently saw the invitation and decided to come on short notice." Victor's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, we're certainly glad to have you, though I'm afraid we weren't prepared for a VIP visit." Keanu glanced back at the playroom door. "That's not a problem," he said. "I was just about to check on those girls. They seem to be alone in there." Victor's expression flickered. A moment of something, annoyance? Worry? It was gone before Keanu could place it. "Ah, yes," Victor said, regaining his polished demeanor. "I'm afraid we've had a bit of a flu outbreak recently. Those two are in quarantine as a precaution. Nothing serious, I assure you. We just can't afford for it to spread." It sounded reasonable, but something in Victor's tone was off. Years of acting had taught Keanu how to read people, and Victor's body language screamed of someone carefully controlling a narrative. Then, before Keanu could say anything else, Victor quickly shut the playroom door, cutting off the sight of the girls entirely. "Now," Victor said smoothly, "why don't I give you a tour of our facility? We're small, but we do our best with what we have." Keanu followed him down the hall, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave. Something about those girls, about the way they looked at him, wasn't right. Victor led Keanu through the orphanage, his practiced voice detailing the struggles of running a place with limited resources. "Funding is always tight," he said. "We do our best, but it's not easy keeping everything running." Keanu nodded absently, his thoughts still on the playroom. "Are you sure those girls in quarantine are okay?" Keanu asked, keeping his tone casual. "Maybe we should turn the light on for them?" Victor let out a light chuckle, his response immediate. "Oh, no need. We turned it off so they could rest. Poor things had a rough night, stuffy noses, couldn't sleep well, you know how it is." Keanu gave a small nod but kept watching Victor closely. Then, Victor opened the door to another playroom. And the difference was staggering. This room was brightly lit, filled with children laughing and playing. The walls were covered in colorful drawings. The air was alive with energy. And yet, Keanu's stomach clenched. All of the children in this room were white. Victor smiled proudly. "This is where our kids spend most of their time. We do our best to create a positive environment despite our limitations." Keanu's gaze drifted around the room, watching the carefree play, the cheerful decorations. His mind flashed back to the other playroom, the dim lighting, the silence, the two frightened girls left alone in the shadows. The contrast was impossible to ignore. "How many children do you care for here?" Keanu asked, keeping his voice neutral. Victor straightened slightly. We currently have 10. We used to have more, but funding constraints forced us to scale back. Keanu nodded, but his mind was racing. This place wasn't just underfunded. Something was wrong here. Victor continued leading Keanu through the orphanage, his voice steady and rehearsed as he spoke about the facility's struggles. With such a small staff, we recently had to let go of 3 caretakers, he explained. Now it's mostly just me, a few kitchen staff, a busboy, and our cleaning service. He guided Keanu into the dining area, a sparse room with long tables and mismatched chairs. Then the dormitories, small, cramped spaces with bunk beds squeezed together. A multi-purpose hall doubled as a classroom, its walls lined with outdated educational posters. And this, Victor announced, opening a door to a small, dimly lit room, is our book room. A few shelves stood against the walls, filled with worn books. We do our best to encourage reading, Victor said, smiling, though new materials are hard to come by. Keanu scanned the room, noticing the lack of space for play. What about outdoor areas? Where do the kids go to get fresh air? Victor's smile tightened slightly. Yes. Unfortunately, most of our outdoor space is occupied by storage cabins and laundry facilities. Space is at a premium here, you understand. Keanu nodded, but his unease only deepened. As they walked, Victor shared more of the orphanage's history. Haven Hills was once a well-respected institution, he said, a hint of pride in his tone. Established in the 1950s by a philanthropist named Elena Harrington. But after she passed, her family sold it to private management, and well, over time, it fell into disrepair. Keanu listened, sensing the story was well practiced. I took over 5 years ago, Victor continued, lifting his chin slightly. Had to modernize things, make it sustainable. We limited the number of children to no more than 12. Now that I'm handling most of the care myself, we no longer accept new children, just focusing on the ones we have. Quality over quantity. Keanu nodded, but something felt off. The cheerful playroom full of laughing, predominantly white children contrasted too sharply with the isolated girls in the dimly lit room. Something wasn't adding up. As they completed the tour and returned to the bright playroom, Keanu noticed something new. 2 small local news outlets had set up cameras and lighting equipment. Victor's demeanor shifted immediately. His back straightened, his smile widened, and his voice took on an easy charm. Perfect timing. Let's get some photos, shall we? It's not every day we have such a distinguished guest. With practiced efficiency, Victor orchestrated the moment, positioning Keanu among the happy, well-cared-for children. Camera flashes went off as Keanu smiled for the photos, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about the 2 girls. Then, Victor's voice, warm and expectant. Now, Mr. Reeves, if you'd like to make your donation, we can capture that moment for posterity. Keanu nodded, pulling out his checkbook. As he signed the check, the cameras clicked away, capturing every moment. Victor beamed. But Keanu could feel the weight of something unfinished. As Victor moved to wrap up the event, thanking him profusely for his generosity, Keanu made a decision. Actually, he said, his voice calm but firm, I'd like to visit the quarantined children as well. Perhaps we could take some photos there. It might help highlight the challenges you face here. Victor's smile faltered. Oh, I'm not sure that's a good idea, he said quickly. The risk of infection. I'm willing to take that risk, Keanu interrupted. His tone remained polite, but his stance was unwavering. A mild flu won't be a problem. And it's important to show all aspects of the orphanage, don't you think? Victor hesitated, his jaw tightening. For a moment, Keanu saw the wheels turning in his head, weighing his options. Finally, Victor relented. Very well, he said, forcing a smile. If you insist, please, follow me. Keanu walked behind him, his gut telling him he was about to uncover something important. As they approached the playroom, Victor's confident stride slowed. His hesitation was almost imperceptible, but Keanu noticed. Victor paused at the door, his hand resting on the handle. "Now, Mr. Reeves," he said lightly, "I must insist we keep this brief. The girls need to rest." Keanu nodded, but his attention was locked on the small window in the door. The girls were still in the corner. Still silent. Still afraid. Victor exhaled sharply, then pushed the door open, flicking on the lights. The sudden brightness made the girls squint. Their eyes darted between Victor, Keanu, and the cameras. Keanu stepped inside, his heart heavy as he took in the stark contrast between this room and the one they had just left. The walls here were bare. The floor was cold linoleum. A few tattered books and a single worn-out teddy bear were the only signs that children occupied the space. Kneeling beside them, Keanu softened his voice. "Hi there. I'm Keanu. What are your names?" The girls stayed silent, their wide eyes filled with apprehension. Keanu couldn't help but notice how they seemed to shrink back in Victor's presence. But their cautious curiosity remained fixed on him. And then, Keanu's stomach clenched. Their faces were flushed. Their skin. He caught glimpses of their arms as they tried to hide them behind their backs. And what he saw made his blood run cold. Keanu knelt beside the two girls, his voice gentle and reassuring. Their skin, reddened as if burned, caught his attention immediately. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm here to help." One of the girls finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Amaya. This is my sister, Alana." Keanu smiled warmly. "Nice to meet you both. How are you feeling?" Before they could answer, Victor quickly interjected, explaining they had fevers and flu symptoms. But Keanu noticed something: no coughing, no wheezing, no runny noses. Just that red flush on their skin. Victor urged them to take a quick photo, and despite their hesitation, the girls complied. Keanu posed with them, masking the unease growing inside him. Just as he was about to ask more questions, his phone buzzed. Stepping out to take the call, he heard Patrick's tense voice. "Keanu, you're late. Are you still at that orphanage?" Keanu exhaled, torn. His obligations in Hollywood loomed over him, but the image of the girls' wary expressions gnawed at him. He glanced back toward the room. Their eyes met his through the window, a silent plea he couldn't quite ignore. "I'm wrapping up now," he finally said, though the words felt wrong. As he returned, a sudden shift in the scene stopped him. The twins were no longer sitting in the corner. Instead, Victor stood with them, gripping their arms for another round of press photos. Keanu's trained eye caught everything: the tension in the girls' posture, the way they tried to edge away from Victor's touch. "Wonderful." Victor beamed for the cameras. "Mr. Reeves, shall we take a few more?" Before Keanu could respond, a reporter pulled Victor aside, leaving the twins momentarily unguarded. Seizing the moment, Keanu crouched down beside them. "Hey," he said softly. "Can I ask you something?" The girls exchanged nervous glances before Alana, the more vocal of the two, gave a tiny nod. "We're not supposed to talk," she whispered. "We're sick." Keanu nodded. "I understand. But, are you really sick?" A long silence. Then, both girls shook their heads. Their eyes darted to the door, fear tightening their expressions. Before Keanu could press further, Victor's voice rang out, loud and commanding. "Well, I think that's enough excitement for our patients." Keanu turned, his mind racing. Something was very, very wrong here. Trying to stay composed, he casually suggested improvements for the quarantine room. If it's being used for sick children, it should be properly equipped. Victor's smile tensed. Of course. Your donation will go directly toward that." The press began packing up, leaving only Victor, Keanu, and the twins in the room. The atmosphere shifted, an invisible battle of control between Keanu's quiet persistence and Victor's increasingly fraying composure. "Mr. Reeves," Victor said, his voice tight. "The girls need to rest now. Let me show you out." Keanu hesitated, then nodded. As he walked away, he heard the unmistakable sound of a lock sliding into place behind him. His gut twisted. Something inside told him this wasn't over. The realization. Driving away, the encounter lingered like a weight on his chest. He replayed every detail, the locked room, the fearful glances, the burns on their skin. And then it hit him. The donation check. Victor still had it. It was a small oversight, but it gave Keanu a reason to return. Without a second thought, he pulled over and dialed Patrick. "Keanu, where are you? You are pushing your next appointment." Keanu inhaled sharply. "Cancel my schedule for today." "What?" "First, just the morning. Now the whole day? What's going on?" "Something's wrong at the orphanage," Keanu said, his voice firm. "I need to go back." A long pause. Then, a sigh. "Fine. But you better have a damn good reason for this." Keanu ended the call, made a U-turn, and sped back toward Haven Hills. The further he drove, the heavier the air felt, as if he were racing against time. And then, as he approached the building, he heard it. A crash. Muffled cries. And a man's raised voice. Keanu didn't hesitate. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The unraveling. The once organized orphanage was now in chaos. Victor's carefully managed image had shattered. A staff member blocked his way, flustered. "Mr. Reeves, you really shouldn't be here." From behind, an older woman's voice cut through. "Let him through." Keanu turned to see an elderly woman gripping a broom, her name tag reading Merida Lafayette. Recognition flickered. The fan letter. The name. Merida. "You know we're not allowed to let anyone in the kitchen," the staff member hissed. Without warning, Merida swung the broom at him. "Then don't let Victor see. Go, Mr. Reeves, help the children." Keanu sprinted down the hall toward the sound of Victor's voice. He burst into the kitchen. And froze. Victor towered over Amaya and Alana, his face contorted with rage. The other children stood frozen in terror, their eyes darting between Victor and the twins. "You always cause problems." Victor snarled. "You're kind." The words turned Keanu's stomach. "Victor." Keanu's voice cut through the tension. Victor spun, his face draining of color as he realized he had been caught. "Mr. Reeves, I wasn't expecting you to return," he stammered, trying to force a smile. Keanu stepped forward, placing himself between Victor and the children. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. Victor scrambled for an excuse. "They left their room. They broke quarantine. I was just explaining." Keanu glanced at the other children. "Is that true?" Silence. Then, a small voice. "They're always kept in that room," a young boy murmured. "Even when they're not sick." Another child chimed in. "We're not allowed to play with them. They always have to stay separate." More voices followed, painting a horrific picture of abuse and neglect. Victor's facade cracked. "Shut up," he barked at the children. "You ungrateful little liars." Keanu's jaw clenched. "That's enough." Victor turned back to him, eyes wild. "You don't understand. Running this place isn't easy. Some sacrifices have to be made. They're children, Victor. Not sacrifices." Keanu pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the authorities." Panic set in Victor's eyes. "You can't. It's my word against yours." Keanu dialed. "No, it's your word against theirs." As the sirens grew louder, Victor snapped. He lunged toward the stove, toward a pot of boiling water. Keanu reacted instantly. "Get back," he shouted, shielding the children as Victor grabbed the handle. But before he could throw it, the police burst in. They tackled Victor to the ground as the pot clattered, hot water splashing onto his own legs. He screamed. And just like that, it was over. A new beginning. Outside, as Victor was dragged to the police car, he shouted at Keanu. "You ruined everything." Keanu stood firm, arms protectively around Amaya and Alana. "No, Victor. You did." The car door slammed shut. The girls flinched at the sound. Keanu looked down at them, his voice soft. "You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore." A silent moment passed. Then, for the first time, Amaya and Alana smiled.